On a spring morning in 1979, a maid let herself into a hotel suite at the Beverly Wilshire and found an old woman asleep in a bed surrounded by pill bottles, weighing less than 70 pounds. Her bank account held about $4,000. Her name was Barbara Hutton, and 50 years earlier, the newspapers had given her a title no one has ever quite matched since: the richest girl in the world. She had once owned Marie Antoinette's own pearl necklace and a tiara that had belonged to an empress, bought and worn the way other women buy a scarf. She had inherited a fortune worth close to $50 million at the age of 21, well over $1 billion today. And in her final years, she was going blind and hid it from almost everyone around her, refusing to let people see her fumble for a door handle, insisting on being carried or wheeled instead. By the time she died that spring, at 66, the woman once called the richest girl alive did not have enough cash on hand for her own funeral. Her family had to help settle the bill. This is the story of a fortune that did not get stolen, did not vanish in a crash, and was not signed away on purpose to any charity. It disappeared the plainest way a fortune can disappear. It was simply spent dollar after dollar by a woman handed the whole thing before anyone gave her a reason to hold on to it. The real question is not why she spent it. Everyone asks that, and the tabloids spent 5 decades answering it with the word scandal. The real question is why nobody ever taught her not to. The machine behind the fortune was built by a man who never went to college and never thought of himself as rich until the numbers forced him to. Frank Winfield Woolworth was a nervous, underpaid store clerk in upstate New York in 1878 with an idea nobody believed in: sell everything for a nickel. No haggling, no credit, just a fixed, absurdly low price on every item so a customer could grab what they wanted and walk out. His employer let him test it as a stunt, a single table of 5-cent goods, and it sold out in an afternoon. Woolworth understood at once what he was looking at: not a clearance sale, a new way to sell anything to everyone. His first 5 and dime in Utica failed within months. He tried again in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, and that one held. From there, he franchised the model, bought back the franchises, and opened stores directly, buying in volume straight from manufacturers to squeeze out every fraction of a cent. Buy cheaper than anyone, sell cheaper than anyone in every town in America at once. By 1912, F.W. Woolworth Company had grown into more than 500 stores, the largest retailer on earth. 2 years later, he built the tallest building in the world, the Woolworth Building in Lower Manhattan, and paid for the entire thing in cash, $13.5 million. No mortgage, just to prove it could be done. They called it the Cathedral of Commerce. Frank Woolworth died in 1919, and the machine kept minting money for another generation under new management, thousands of stores strong, a fixture on every main street the way a post office was. But he had a peculiarity that would matter enormously later. He had daughters, not sons, and in the world he came from, a fortune was something a man passed to another man. His favorite daughter, Edna, married a broker named Franklin Hutton, a partner at the very same firm, E.F. Hutton, that turns up elsewhere in the story of American dynasties. Edna and Franklin had one child, a daughter, born in 1912, named Barbara. This is the child who would one day inherit the crown of the entire Woolworth fortune, and almost nothing in her childhood prepared her for the weight of it. Barbara Hutton was 5 years old when her mother died. The official cause was pneumonia. Barbara herself later said she believed her mother had taken her own life. Whatever the truth, a 5-year-old girl was left essentially parentless because her father had almost no interest in raising her. He handed her off to relatives, shuttled her between her grandfather's mansion and a rotating cast of nurses, and built his own life at a comfortable distance. She had nurses instead of a mother, and an absent father who treated visits like an obligation. What she never had was a single adult modeling what it looked like to build something. She was raised entirely inside the spending half of the fortune and never introduced to the earning half. Every fortune on this channel eventually meets a generation that inherited the money without the machine. Barbara Hutton is the purest case there is because she never had the chance to inherit anything else. There was no father walking her through the store counter the way Marjorie Post's father once had. There was only money arriving on a schedule attached to no lesson at all. Frank Woolworth had left his fortune inside a trust, and by the time Barbara turned 21 in 1933, her share vested in full. The papers put it at somewhere between $42 and $50 million at the exact moment men across the country were standing in bread lines. in today's money, well north of $1 billion. The press nicknamed her immediately, and it stuck for life. The poor little rich girl. It was meant with a strange mix of envy and pity, because even in 1933, people sensed something was wrong with the picture. What was wrong was not the size of the number, it was the shape of the life underneath it. Unlike Marjorie Post, who spent her childhood inside her father's business learning how the money moved, Barbara Hutton had spent her childhood entirely on the receiving end of money that simply appeared. She turned 21 in the middle of the worst economic collapse in American history and marked it with a debutante ball costing around $60,000 in a year when the average family lived on less than $2,000 total. That gap between the party and the breadline is the whole story in miniature. She did not build anything with her fortune, did not run the company, did not sit on its board in any meaningful way. She treated the money the only way she had ever been taught to, as a fact of life rather than a responsibility, and she began spending it on the project that would define and eventually consume the rest of her life. Husbands. She married 7 times. In nearly every marriage, the pattern repeated with almost mechanical precision. A foreign aristocrat or a glamorous companion, a lavish wedding built for headlines, an enormous cash settlement to secure the match or to end it, and then, within a few years, the next one. Her first husband was a Georgian prince, Alexis Midavani, and the wedding gifts alone ran into the millions. When it ended, she paid a settlement well past $1 million just to close the book. Her second, a Danish count named Kurt Haugwitz Reventlow, gave her only child, a son named Lance, but also years of ugly public legal battles over money and custody that drained the fortune from both directions at once. Cary Grant became her third husband, and this one cost her less in raw cash, though the tabloids mocked them as cash and carry because everyone assumed money ran beneath the romance. After Grant came a Lithuanian prince, a German-born baron, a Vietnamese diplomat whose title may have been held only loosely, and finally a Portuguese aristocrat, her 7th and last husband, who died only a few years into the marriage, by which point little fortune remained for anyone to fight over. Add up the estimates across her lifetime and you land somewhere around $40 to $50 million, roughly the entire size of the fortune she had inherited, gone through the single channel of matrimony. But marriage was only one leak in the hull. Barbara Hutton lived expensively in a way that had almost no off switch, because nothing in her upbringing had ever taught her a fortune could run dry. She bought palaces the way other people buy furniture, a villa in Tangier filled with rare art, a mansion in Beverly Hills, homes in London, in Cuernavaca, and elsewhere, most staffed year-round whether she was in residence or not, the same white elephant math that ran through the Post and Vanderbilt fortunes, except here there was no working machine quietly refilling the accounts. She collected jewelry on a scale that belonged in a museum, diamonds and rare Cartier pieces, some of which now command record prices at auction, precisely because no other collector bought at that pace with that little regard for whether it would ever earn its keep. She was famously generous too, covering friends and staff's debts as casually as her own, because the one lesson nobody ever taught her was the difference between having money and having an income. Here is the mechanism worth sitting with, because it runs through every story on this channel, wearing a different costume each time. A fortune is not actually a pile of money, it is a rate. Frank Woolworth's fortune was a rate, attached to 500 stores selling nickel goods every single day, a machine generating cash whether he was awake or asleep. What Barbara Hutton inherited was not that rate. It was a single frozen number, the trust's value on the day she turned 21, disconnected from the machine that created it and handed to her as a lump sum to be drawn down rather than a stream to be managed and grown. She never controlled the stores, never sat on a board that mattered, had no operating income, renewing itself the way Frank Woolworth's nickels had renewed themselves for 40 years. She had, in effect, a bathtub full of water with the drain left open, and every marriage, every villa, every diamond was another turn of the tap in the wrong direction. A rate can run forever, as long as the machine underneath it keeps running. A fixed sum, no matter how enormous, can only go one way. It took about 4 decades. By the 1960s, people close to her were already whispering that the fortune once near $50 million had shrunk to a fraction of that. When she died in 1979, her estate was reported close to nothing in liquid terms, some accounts putting her remaining assets in the low hundreds of thousands, not enough by several tellings to comfortably cover her own funeral without family help. The richest girl in the world died with less spending money than a mid-level executive keeps in a checking account. No scandal, no swindle, no single villain, only the slow arithmetic of a fixed sum drawn down for 46 years by someone never once taught how to stop the tap. Her only child, Lance Reventlow, might have broken the pattern. Unlike his mother, Lance had a genuine passion outside spending, racing, and built a real career around it, founding his own race car company and competing seriously in American motorsport through the 1960s. He was the one member of that generation who showed interest in doing rather than simply having. But Lance died in a plane crash in 1972 at 36, 7 years before his own mother, and with him died any chance the Hutton branch would find its own version of Biltmore. The line ran out before it had the chance to correct itself. Hold Barbara Hutton's story against the other names on this channel, because the contrast sharpens the lesson. Marjorie Post inherited a fortune and grew it for decades because her father walked her through the factory floor as a child. The Vanderbilts split an enormous machine into pieces, but at least 2 generations had actually run railroads with their own hands first. The Bush family diluted its ownership across a century of public stock sales, but they were still, generation after generation, running a brewery. Even the Hiltons, who gave the fortune away on purpose, did it as a conscious choice made by men who had spent their whole lives inside the hotel business. Every other family on this channel lost its fortune to a structural flaw layered on top of real, functioning expertise. Barbara Hutton is the only one who never had the expertise to lose in the first place. She was handed the largest slice of the fortune and the least preparation of anyone in this series. Orphaned at 5, abandoned in practice by her father, raised by staff, introduced to the machine that made her money not as an apprentice, but as a customer, a permanent, lifelong customer of her own inheritance, drawing down an account nobody ever taught her to refill. There is an old expression for what happened to the Woolworth fortune, the same one that appears on this channel in different accents. Shirt sleeves to shirt sleeves in 3 generations. Frank Woolworth built it in his shirt sleeves behind a nickel counter in Lancaster. His daughter Edna lived inside it, comfortable but still tethered to a working husband. Barbara, the 3rd generation, was handed the entire remaining balance in one lump sum at 21 and given no machine, no apprenticeship, no functioning family to teach her the difference between wealth and income. The Woolworth stores themselves actually outlived her fortune, continuing to operate for years after her death before finally being restructured out of existence in the 1990s. The machine did not fail, it was simply never handed to the person who inherited its proceeds. So step back from the marriages and the villas, because underneath all of it sits the same principle running through every story in this series, seen from a new angle. A fortune is never actually inherited whole. What gets inherited is one of 2 things, either the machine that makes the money or the pile of money the machine already made. The families who survive across generations pass down the machine, however they structure it, a working company, a strict trust, a holding vehicle that keeps the next generation tethered to the discipline of running something. The families who vanish pass down only the pile, disconnected from any machine at all, and hand it to an heir who has never once been asked to make a single dollar of it themselves. Barbara Hutton did not fail some test of character the rest of us would have passed in her position. She simply never sat the test in the first place. Nobody ever put it in front of her. She was raised from the age of 5 to be the recipient of an enormous, ownerless number, and she behaved for the rest of her life exactly the way anyone raised that way behaves. She spent it because spending it was the only relationship to money she had ever been shown. There's a strange kind of mercy hiding at the bottom of this story, the same one that hides at the bottom of nearly every fortune that disappears this way. Barbara Hutton was called the poor little rich girl for almost 50 years, a nickname that always sounded like an insult and was, underneath it, closer to an accurate diagnosis. She was poor long before the money ran out, poor in the one resource that actually keeps a fortune alive across generations, which was never marble or jewels or a trust document, but knowledge. The families who last make certain that whoever inherits the pile also inherits the machine, the discipline, and the understanding of what it took to build it in the first place. Frank Woolworth handed his own daughter both, a business she could watch operate and a husband who kept working. He never got the chance to hand either one to his granddaughter, and by the time she was old enough to need them, there was no one left in her life willing to try. The richest girl in the world died with almost nothing, not because the money disappeared into a scandal. It was never really hers to keep in the first place. It was only ever hers to spend, and eventually, dollar by dollar, marriage by marriage, that is exactly what it became.